Welcome to members of the public this afternoon. Welcome to Somerset North Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Cathy Pearce. I'm chair of the committee. First of all, I'll just go through the housekeeping things. We're not expecting a fire drill this afternoon, so if the alarm goes off, it's likely to be the real thing. Please head out through reception and the main door into King Square. There are toilets in reception should you need them, and there's water to you. This meeting is a hybrid meeting, and that means that committee members are present in Bridgewater House, and the meeting is also available online via Teams. Please note that the meeting is being recorded. Can I remind all of you in the room to turn your mobile phones off or to silent, please? And for those joining us online, please also turn off your cameras and microphones so that the meeting isn't disturbed. I'll now introduce those taking part in the committee today. To my left are officers from our legal and democratic teams, and to my right are the planning officers who will present the application. On the wings of the table are the councillors who will debate and decide the application. The format is as per the published agenda, and a copy of the officer report can be found on the council website. Officers will outline the application, followed by public speaking time, and only members of the public who have registered to speak can make representation. Councillors around the table will then debate and decide the application. During the debates, there will be a proposer and a seconder for a resolution. Members will vote on the proposal, and only members who have been present throughout the whole application will be able to vote. The voting options are for, against, abstain and defer. Votes will be counted and the result announced. So we'll now go into the main body of the agenda, and agenda item 1 is apologies for absence.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Matthew Martin and Councillor Brian Smeckley.
We go to next agenda item 2, minutes from the previous meeting on pages 13 to 22. So we need to approve the minutes from the previous meeting. Do I have somebody to propose and second, please? Councillor Ham proposing and Councillor Murphy seconding. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. I'm not voting because I was absent. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Can I ask Paula, our legal officer, just to give a brief summary on why we need to declare interest, when and why? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, councillors, members of the public. It's just a reminder and for information to the public about declarations of interest. So Section 29 of the Localism Act 2011 requires the Council's monitoring officer to maintain a register of interest of members of the authority. Councillors need to register any interest so that the public, local authority employees and fellow councillors know which interests might give rise to a conflict of interest. This register is a public document which can be consulted when or before an issue arises. Councillors are personally responsible in deciding whether they should declare an interest in an item at a meeting. An interest may occur in varying circumstances. So if the member of the committee is also a member of a parish or town council, they may previously be involved in a consultation process and so may already have some knowledge or involvement in a particular application. If a member of a committee has not taken part in previous discussions, or maybe has but can come to the committee with an open mind and has not predetermined that matter, they can take part in the discussion, debate and vote. If, however, they have declared an interest and or are predetermined, they may only speak on the application at the appropriate time and then must leave the room and cannot vote. If councillors would raise their hand if they have want to declare an interest today, then we'll take a note of it and move on. Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item. Oh, sorry, I need to then. Are there any declarations of interest? Thank you, Councillor Bruce.
The usual. I'm a member of the Power Drainage Board, not taking part in any discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford.
Same comments, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hendry.
I'm part of the Axe Group in the board, but I'm speaking to James Body there.
Thank you, and I need to declare a non-registrable interest as a member of Bridgewater Town Council, but I have not taken part in any discussions. Councillor Slocum.
The very same, thank you.
Okay. Oh. Councillor Filmer.
That's the house that declared the
Yes.
tax approval, if I remember the act approval.
Okay.
Involved in this.
Yeah, thank you. We now go on to public question time. There are a number of you that have registered to speak. We will take, I will call you to the table in front, one by one, once the officer has presented the application. So then we go on to agenda item 5, which is the planning application. Land is the Bower Lane, East Bower, Bridgewater. This is a hybrid application, so a mixture of outline and full planning permission, which the officer will explain. So would you like to present the application, please?
Good afternoon, Chair. Thank you. Hopefully the presentation is loading on the screen. Give that a few seconds, but just to introduce myself, because I appreciate some of the councillors wouldn't have seen me before, but my name's Luke Challenger. I'm an Associate Director at Highest Associates. So we are working with officers at Somerset Council under a planning performance agreement to help perform a case officer function for this application. So that's my role on the project. And if I just run through the slides now, so we can see on screen. So just to read out the full front page. So reference 09/23000003 land east of Bower Lane, East Bower, Bridgewater. So this is a planning application. It's a hybrid application for outline planning permission with all matters reserved, save for site access for phase development of up to 750 dwellings, a primary school, community facility access, alterations to Bower Lane, public open space, play areas, landscaping, drainage, infrastructure, and other associated works. And because it's a hybrid, there's also a full element to it. And the full planning permission element is for the formation of a noise band, spine road, and associated landscaping, drainage, and other engineering works. So let's carry on through the slides. So I will, as we go through the slides, a lot of these main considerations will be explored in more detail. But just as a high-level overview, so we're going to look at the principle of development, specifically compliance with policy B3 of the local plan, which allocates the land and the wider land in the local plan. We'll touch on housing land supply, also the East of Bridgewater Design Principles document, which is a non-development plan document which followed on from the local plan in terms of further details of the allocation. Housing mix and affordable housing. And members will note, subject to detailed discussions on viability, the affordable housing contribution is 5%, which is obviously lower than the 30% policy allocation, but that's subject to detailed viability assessment, which again we'll explore later in the presentation. We'll talk about education and community use, given the proposed land for the school and the land for the community centre or community use element in the scheme. Transport and movement, obviously noise, pollution impacts of the development, flooding and drainage, which is quite a key one in terms of the drainage strategy, ecology, on-site open space, landscape and visual impacts. And I suppose just to say on landscape and visual impacts, the broad impacts of landscape were considered in allocating the site. So there was always some, envisaging of landscape impacts, and the detailed scheme, and when it comes forward, we'll obviously look at landscape mitigation, heritage and sustainability points, development and viability and planning obligations. And again, we'll look into the viability issue in more detail and what is proposed, and then any other matters. So just to say as well, I think the one important point to note is the planning application at present is also subject to a further period of consultation on revised plans for drainage. The specific plans show a wider maintenance buffer along the Reen, effectively extending the buffer from 5.5 metres to 6 metres, and that followed detailed discussion with the internal drainage board. But because of the revised plans, those are currently subject to a period of consultation. So the recommendation will be, we'll get onto it at the end, but the recommendation will be subject to no significant issues being raised as part of the current consultation. The recommendation will be to approve. So that's one element to the updated report. The other two, slight revised condition wording in relation to condition 27, which duplicated condition 48. So suppose condition 27 is deleted, and then a slight revised wording to condition 24, just to refer to the latest flood risk assessment. And then some minor wording changes to recommendation number 3, which refers to the chief planning officer and material issues. But again, we'll kind of come on to that later on. So site location, I'm sure obviously members will know where the site is, but the plans on the screen just help orientate us. So effectively we're on the eastern edge of the built-up area of Bridgewater, in between the eastern edge and the M5 motorway. To the north of the site we have the Bath Road A39, and further south we have the Western Zoyland Road. So this is slightly zoomed in version of the plan. So in addition, Barrow Lane effectively runs along the edge of the site. So this plan is tipped on the side. So Barrow Lane's on the western edge of the site here, running north-south, and the scheme does propose some changes to that, which we'll come on to. An aerial plan here. This helps just to show effectively the site part of a wider allocation, and the Bower Farm element of the allocation is shown here to the left. This was one of the earlier phases of development, and effectively the scheme would connect into the road which the Bower Farm site has built out, which connects to the new roundabout on Western Zoyland Road. The local plan, so we've mentioned obviously it's allocated under policy B3 of the local plan. Some key things to note on the headlines of that. The scheme envisages, or the allocation envisages 1,200 homes on the wider sites, not just this application site, but adjacent Bower Farm and Foller's Farm. The A372 to A39, which is Western Zoyland Road to Bath Road, the link road through the site to connect those two A roads. A revision to how Barrow Lane works at the moment. So currently it's vehicle access up and down Barrow Lane. The scheme will propose much of that will be reduced to pedestrian and cycle access as part of a green lane upgrade to Barrow Lane. Affordable housing in line with local requirements. Now, as I said before, the policy would seek 30%, but because of viability, the scheme being considered is 5% affordable housing. New primary schools, a serviced site for a neighbourhood centre, public open space, and comprehensive green infrastructure. If we move on to viability, the applicant has put forward a financial viability report, and the council has commissioned its own independent viability consultant to review that, and that's being subject to much negotiation back and forth. And the agreed position with both parties is presented in the report, and the table is summarised on this slide. So effectively, because of the various financial constraints, the benchmark land value being what it is, and particularly abnormal infrastructure costs, which equate to approximately £31 million, relating to things such as additional piled foundations, surcharging, attenuation basins, increased specification of spine road and noise bund. those abnormal costs have led to a reduced viability position. The scheme as presented, technically wouldn't, as presented, wouldn't be able to afford affordable housing contributions, but the offer from the applicant is to provide 5% affordable housing. And that position is agreed in terms of the viability methodology with the council's viability consultant. The important thing to note, I would draw members' attention to the fact there is a review mechanism on this viability position, because obviously it's not an ideal position in terms of it's lower than the policy allocation. But the review mechanism will mean that if the market circumstances change in the future, build costs change, or the value of the scheme changes, the viability position can be reviewed to see if 5% is actually appropriate. And at that time, that could facilitate increases to affordable housing provision, or perhaps other contributions, such as NHS contributions, which again, I'll come on to. The other thing to note, in addition to the 106 contributions, the scheme would be providing a community infrastructure levy contribution, circa £3.89 million. That will be confirmed at reserve master stage once you have the detailed floor space. I think would also like to draw members' attention to, obviously, we're conscious the applicant issued members with a briefing note over the weekend, and I think there's probably references in there to 10% affordable housing, and also in our officers' reports as well, there's a reference to that. So just to explain what that means is it was proposed that if the CIL liability were reduced by 50%, which can happen with exceptional circumstances relief, that might allow more financial value for increased affordable housing contributions, so an additional 5%. But I think we would like to stress with members that we don't know the outcome of that CIL relief exercise. So we don't know at this stage whether that will actually increase beyond the 5%. So just to say that's not a material consideration we can take into account, but just to put that into context. So effectively, the affordable housing offer on the table to be considered is the 5% with the review mechanism. So I think that's everything on viability. Moving on, the local plans. So obviously, we referred to policy B3 in the local plan. The annex to the local plan includes this plan showing the wider development of East of Bridgewater. So the site we're looking at today, the application, is the central portion of this allocation, 750 units. As I pointed out before, to the southern end of the site, Bower Farm, is already being delivered, and then Follett's Farm, further south of Western Zoyland Road, is also subject to separate planning applications. So this scheme will effectively be the last substantial piece of the allocation and help deliver the school land, help deliver land for community use, and also quite critically, really, the link road between the A39 and Western Zoyland Road. Following the local plan, the council also published the East of Bridgewater Development and Design Principles document, which was a non-statutory document, and it looked to explore the detail of the scheme further, and it presented a range of parameter plans in terms of land use, drainage, green space, etc. The plan on the screen is an illustrative master plan within that design principles document. Now, in our assessment of the planning application, we can see that many of the aspirations of this design principles document have been carried forward in the outline planning application in its own parameter plans. And that was a key reference for officers in considering compliance with planning policy. So moving on, we can see on the screen now the illustrative master plan, which is part of the planning application. Just to stress, this is illustrative only, it's not for approval, but it does set out some of the obviously the key principles and showing how effectively a future reserve matters application or applications could come forward. And these the parameter plans which follow basically allow this illustrative master plan to I suppose come to fruition through future reserve master stages. So again, key points of vehicle access from Bower Farm to the south of the site. I don't know if members can see my cursor, but effectively the link road was linking to the Bower Farm road. And then to the north of the site, effectively the main point of access would be through a reorganised junction with the existing Bower Lane to the north, and the pink land in the middle is the school, and the purple is where we've got some kind of play area and sports provision. Next slide, access and movement. Again, so the parameter plans would be effectively approved through the application, and as I said, provide the framework for future reserve matters applications. The key takeaway from this is the routing of the spine road and the downgrading of Bower Lane to a green lane, as I said, with no vehicle access, pedestrian and cyclist only. There are some exceptions to that downgrading. There's still vehicle access needed on some parts of Bower Lane to facilitate access to properties. There's probably 2 or 3 kind of along the stretch, but for the most part, really, it's not, wouldn't be a through route as it is now. Land use parameters plan, again, yellow showing residential parcels, the pink area showing the school and the community facility area, and obviously green open space with the spine road going through. Green and blue infrastructure parameter plan, the darker blue areas showing the existing rhymes, the lighter blue areas showing linear swells, wildlife area shown in yellow on the plan there, in addition to the play areas and green spaces. In terms of play areas and green spaces, we'll come on to it, but Sports England have raised some concern in terms of the provision of sports and play provision. Building heights parameter plan, effectively showing majority two-story height, most of the site with a slight increase in height to 2.5 stories along the spine road. So you can see there the different colour shading effectively showing high heights along the spine road, which we would expect as officers to indicate high densities where you have the key route through the site. The other element of height, I suppose, on this plan is the noise band. So between the M5 motorway, the bottom of this plan, and the site, there is a proposed noise band. So that would comprise a 3 metre earth band with a 3 metre fence on top. So 6 metres in total for the most part of the site. This is the phasing plan, just showing. Appreciate it might be difficult to read, but the broad phasing is assumed to go from north to south. The key thing we'd like to come on to, though, on this plan is the quantum of development. So you'll note that 1,200 homes is allowed for in the allocation. This scheme is for 750 homes. The previous schemes at Bower Farm and Follett's Farm were there was 260 and 530 units respectively. So effectively, the total allocation, the total of the applications would exceed the allocation. So officers have considered this in terms of the acceptability of that increase. Important to note that when the Follett's Farm scheme was considered, this increase in capacity was envisaged, and it was said that every application needs to be determined on its own merits in terms of impacts. So if we look at those 2 earlier schemes, they total 790 dwellings. which would only leave 410 dwellings left if this scheme were to not exceed the 1,200 homes in the allocation. But effectively, by doing that, that would limit the density to 14 to 15 dwellings per hectare, which officers considered would be vast underdevelopment and not appropriate in terms of design. So the scheme at 750 actually proposes a density very similar to those earlier schemes at approximately 25 to 28 dwellings per hectare. So in design terms, it's acceptable. And the policy officer for the council also considered it's acceptable, subject to the specific impacts of the scheme being considered, transport, etc., which we'll come on to, but effectively the highways officer supports the scheme. So just to address that point on the increase in site capacity. Now we're going to move on to the detailed elements of the scheme. So one of the detailed elements is the acoustic bund along the motorway. This plan shows some of the specific cross sections of the acoustic bund. As I said before, it's a 3-metre bund with a 3-metre fence on top. It narrows slightly as you come down to where the public right of way, which crosses the site over the motorway bridge, intersects with the bund. So at that point, you'll see some of these plans show a slightly narrower bund just to allow the public right of way to basically cut through where that is. If we move on, so as I said before, the scheme is subject to a pre-consultation period on the drainage maintenance zones. Now that specifically relates to what we can see on this plan. So this is the noise bund, and to the right we have a proposed 6-metre maintenance area to allow maintenance vehicles to basically come along and maintain the REAN, which is to the right of the site. Now, previously this plan showed 5.5-metre maintenance zone, and the Internal Drainage Board objected to that. They basically said it wasn't sufficient to allow proper maintenance. So through negotiation with the applicant, they've proposed a wider area, so effectively moving the bund further out to allow a 6-metre maintenance zone. Now, the Internal Drainage Board agree in principle with that, but again, because these plans came forward quite late, effectively that's why they're being consulted on at the moment. But again, because the Internal Drainage Board already have expressed agreement in principle through our discussions, I think we would expect them to obviously say the same when they come forward with their final consultation response. The other element of the revised scheme not shown on this plan is where you've got the ordinary watercourses adjacent to the spine road. The applicant is also now proposing a wider buffer zone on either side, between 4 to 6 metres on either side of the REANs there. Again, that came through discussion with the Internal Drainage Board, and their preference is to make sure these waterways can be sufficiently maintained. That's a wider view of the network of REANs and drainage across the site. Again, a detailed element of the scheme. Oops. Spine road. So there are various plans showing the detail of the spine road. This is one plan. Effectively, as I said before, you're connecting the A39. You're downgrading Bowling here, and you're proposing a new road through the site to link up eventually to Western Zoyland Road. But this plan shows that the type of detail and the level of detail that members will be approving with the plans. So this is one section. Effectively, you've got the detailed orientation, widths of the road, footways, turning heads, etc. So that's the level of detail being considered with this application. And again, just to say, obviously various discussions have occurred with highways over the past 3 years since the application has been in, and effectively highways are now content with the scheme, so they support the detail of the road. Engineering strategy, this is also proposed for determination. this is effectively, this is plan from the flood risk and surface water drainage strategy, which shows land raising up to 6.5 metre AOD required by the Environment Agency, given the flood risk sensitivity of the site. So the detail of that is shown on the various engineering plans for determination. And these plans also show surface water catchment areas and drainage outfalls. Moving on to open space. So here we can see this is a CGI image of parts of the site. So effectively we are to the north of the proposed school site. We're looking to the east. The school's on the right hand side, and here you've got the Muga and play areas. Now just to say, Sport England have put forward objections based on the fact that they're on contributions or provision of certain types of sports provision, and that they've requested contributions to local rugby club, etc. The officers have carefully considered what is being proposed with the scheme in terms of play and sports, and officers consider that the scheme does meet the criteria of policy. So, for example, it provides a range of local areas of play, 5 in total, dotted through the site, local equipped area of play, multi-use game area, and the land adjacent to the school, basically comprising 0.8 hectares, allowing a shared facility for sports use. So, on balance, officers considered that despite the Sport England objection, the play and sport provision of the scheme meets policy. We'll move on to a section of site photographs just to provide some further orientation. So this photo is taken on Bower Lane. We're looking north, and we're looking from the end of Magnolia Tree Road. So if members are familiar with the site, this is effectively where the public right of way, which crosses the site and leads to the motorway bridge, goes west to east. And you can see here, obviously, the existing nature of Bower Lane. Just effectively no pedestrian access, and obviously hedgerows on either side. If we look to the next photo, so we are turning to the right and we're looking east over the route of the public right of way. One of the fields shown on the field shown in this photograph would be one of the residential parcels of the scheme. If members can kind of bear that in mind. So at this point, we are further along the public right of way, and we're on the motorway bridge, so we get an elevated view of the site, and we're looking northwest. So here we can see in the distance properties of Plumtree Close, on the opposite side of Bower Lane, and then to the right hand side we have the M5. We're looking at the same point. We're looking south now. And in the distance, well, to the left, we can see the motorway, M5 motorway and the Reen. And to the distance, this is the Bower Farm development, which probably might need to squint to see it, but you can probably see some of the dwellings and the noise band. It's loading on that screen. Sorry, we're just having some IT issues while this plan loads on that screen.
Sorry, can I confirm for the screens on the pillars, can you actually see the same visuals you've got on that side, or have you got a white slide? Okay, that's fine.
Okay. So the photograph here, we're facing south. Yeah, we can see the Bower Farm development in the distance and the noise band with the M5 motorway and the Reen to the left. If I go to the next slide, hopefully this works. Yeah, that's worked. Okay, good. Similar view, we're facing more to the right though, and again, the Bower Farm development is quite obvious and along the distant horizon there, and or the mid horizon behind the row of trees. This land parcel would be one of the residential land parcels with the proposed scheme. Other matters, so just to say, National Highways have, in respect of the M5 motorway, have provided proposed conditions, which are in the report later on. And just to speak briefly about the NHS contributions, so the NHS did initially request a contribution to local GP surgeries. With the previous case officer, the question was raised and put back to the clinical commissioning group regarding the projects or that money would be directed to. The NHS basically responded to say there weren't any specific projects that they could allocate the money to, and because of the planning tests on obligations, officers didn't consider that met the relevant tests because there wasn't a specific project. The NHS did say, though, that they're continuing with a 10-year plan for enhancement to healthcare in the area, and that once that's complete, they would then be able to know what contributions might be required. Now, I say that because obviously we've got this review mechanism for the 106, so there is some potential to revisit the NHS contribution at that time if there's more clarity on specific projects that meet those tests for obligations. Planning balance. So just to, I suppose, conclude on some of these planning balance matters, as we've seen, that officers consider the principle of development is acceptable because we have the local plan and the design and development principles document, which it is aligned with. The parameter plans align with that document, and we consider that they will allow suitable reserve matters applications to come forward and be considered in the future. Housing mix isn't for consideration at this stage, but as we can see, the density assumed with the scheme would allow a suitable housing mix to be considered at reserve matter stage. Affordable housing, as I said, is proposed at 5% below the 30% policy, given the evidence on viability that's been presented. Noise issues with the bund. So there is a condition in the application which will need to be complied with, which requires the applicant to provide further details of the internal and external residential amenity for future property owners or people living in those properties, to make sure that the noise bund will create a suitable noise environment for them. So that's subject to detailed condition. Flood risk and drainage, we've obviously looked at, and we think that officers consider that can be mitigated both with land raising, so 6.5 metres, and suitable maintenance buffers to motorway greens and ordinary watercourse greens. Ecology, there are no significant concerns raised. Other matters can be covered by condition. Outdoor sports provision, as we said, there's a Sport England objection, but officers consider on balance the scheme meets the relevant policy criteria. Landscape and visual impacts, there were no significant adverse impacts considered. And heritage, also no significant concerns. There's a condition on heritage requiring detailed trial trenching for archaeological purposes. So we'll move on to the summary and recommendation. So the first line of the recommendation, members will see, is resolved to grant the application subject to a deed poll. Now, just to explain what that is, so as Somerset Council and part of the application site, we need to consider a deed poll. So the local planning authority as planning decision maker and the local authority as landowner perform separate functions. However, as they are the same entity, it is not possible for them to enter into a Section 106 agreement to secure planning obligations in the usual way. So a deed poll will effectively allows a mechanism to the local planning authority to manage the situation in these circumstances, and a deed poll will be executed unilaterally by the local authority to bind the council's land to the obligations necessary to facilitate delivery of the development. So I'll just turn back to read out the summary again. So resolved to grant the application subject to the deed pool, and following the planning obligations and conditions as below, and then we go on to the various 106 obligations. So reading these out, obviously the 5% affordable housing offer, subject to the review mechanism, financial contributions to the Dunbar roundabout scheme of circa £937,000, financial contribution to pedestrian improvements subject to circa £389,000, financial contributions to travel plan circa £673,000, the completion of the Spine Road through the site, securing a requirement for land for the primary school to be offered for transfer to the local education authority, subject to relevant trigger points, securing the delivery of a serviced site to deliver community facility use, subject to relevant trigger points, secure the delivery of long-term management and maintenance of on-site public open space and play space, including the 5 local areas of play, one locally equipped area of play, a multi-use games area, and a local environmental management plan, and a minimum of 2.8 hectares of on-site open space provision shown on the green infrastructure parameter plan. Next point, delivery of key pedestrian and cycle connections, including the Barrow Lane green route and off-site active travel measures, and amenity space to the satisfaction of the development manager in consultation with the council's ecologist and open space officers. And then finally, as I said before, the financial review clause to secure additional affordable housing and NHS contribution. And the second part, points 2 and 3 of the summary and recommendation, is to obviously observe the conditions set out in the committee report from page 75. And as I mentioned before, the successful conclusion of the 14-day reconsultation period, subject to that, I'll read it out again, sorry. Successful conclusion of the 14-day reconsultation period with the Chief Planning Officer confirming that no new material issues have been raised and that authority be delegated to the Chief Planning Officer in consultation with the Chair or Vice Chair of the Planning Committee where appropriate. I would just flick back to the planning balance page and then conclude the presentation.
Thank you, Luke. We have a few speakers this afternoon, and I'd like to invite Sarah Baker of the East Bridgewater Urban Wildlife Group, please, to the table. Now you'll have 3 minutes. If you can put the microphone on, just let us know when you're ready to start and we'll stop the timer. Normally we have a big clock in the front. It's not working at the moment, so it's just up there on the screen. Okay.
Wessex Water provided a consultation response of no objection. This is not the same as evidence that there is spare environmental capacity. I'm asking for this committee to defer this planning application until 2029, when Ofwat publishes its final detrimentations for the 2029 price review at the end of 2028. The reason being, the proposal exceeds policy B3. Bridgewater Water Recycling Centre reached treatment capacity before 2024. There were 38 storm overflow spills during the 2024 bathing season, and significant wastewater investment is not planned until the AMP 9, Asset Management Plan 9. The council has not been provided with sufficient evidence that the wastewater infrastructure can support this increase in housing numbers without unacceptable cumulative impacts. Granting permission in these circumstances would be contrary to the local plan's infrastructure policies and the national planning policy framework's requirements for sustainable development, healthy communities and protection of the water environment. Wessex Water confirmed in Wessex C10 enhancements costs that the growth response of Ofwat's PR24 draft determination, that the plans to expand Bridgewater are not in the current asset management plan, AMP8, only in the AMP9 that starts in 2030, if 44.2 million can be secured. Note, the AMP6 didn't deliver Burnham-on-Sea. 21% of the increase in population, they have put in this document, increases in population will result in additional flows to the water recycling centre. 21% of their wastewater is from current traders, excluding gravity. 2023, they announced that they had no other land suitable for expansion in Bridgewater. The site is landlocked and there is no usable area available on site or in the immediate surrounding areas. So under section 38, we ask you to take that into consideration. I also would like to point out that in any criteria that no organisation, it should be listed that no organisation should be allowed to buy multiple houses like Strawberry Grange. We have got an increase of facilities that need ambulance or air ambulance landing spots. And I also like to point out to you that the officer doesn't seem to include the detailed response from the crime prevention through environmental design planning response.
Sarah, your 3 minutes are up.
Oh, sorry.
Are you just at the finishing point?
Yeah, I'll just finish that one. This is not, so it's not included in the officer's report. So we're not having the up-to-date crime reports, and we are currently partway through the 10-year reduction of state education reduction.
Thank you. You've raised a number of issues, and I'm sure the other speakers will as well. We'll take all the issues raised at the end of the speakers, just in case there's duplication, and it will stop the flow of you speaking. So can I now invite Councillor Carol Edmonds, who is speaking on behalf of residents. Carol, it's three minutes. Just let us know when you're ready to start. Just press the grey button.
This application is for 750 dwellings, which will generate 315 pupils for primary and early years. This is within a total of 663 total pupils for the East Bridgewater site. A large primary school will be needed. In considering this application, please be aware that the 2.2 hectares of land planned for a school provides for only 420 pupils, according to the Department of Education. And this school is also to serve as a community facility. The Council's Education Planning Advisor's report proposes that unlucky children not in the local school will be sent out to an as yet unbuilt school at Wellstock within North Petherton catchment. This is in the west of Bridgewater, and they live in the east, very young children facing a daily commute of some distance, a 9-mile round trip, possibly even a route on the M5, which is impractical and totally undesirable. Sunset Highways have not recognised that under provision locally will generate additional journeys. To support community cohesion, children should attend school locally, where they can walk, cycle and make friends, not be unnecessarily bussed around our already congested town against stated policy. The response highlights secondary and SEND provision, saying it is yet to be built. The Poldenbauer School is already operating 30% above its baseline capacity. It is bursting at the seams. The application combines a school with community facilities. How will this be possible? Security, logistics, safeguarding all mean community use will be limited and may not materialise. This is the community hub for the whole of the East Bridgewater developments and Bower. There is no plan or agreement for ongoing management with Somerset Council or Bridgewater Town Council. Will it be up to the school to run? Will it be a private enterprise, or should the community expect the burden? The location itself on the site must raise questions. Situated at the narrowest point, now is the opportunity to challenge this. World Health Organization guidance states that daytime sound pressures in outdoor living spaces over 60 decibels constitutes serious annoyance. National highways measured M5 noise in excess of 60 decibels, which is 10 above moderate and about twice as loud, for 16 hours a day. National Highways believes the proposed noise band may not protect from 16 hours a day of serious annoyance. At this time, permission should not be granted due to inadequate school provision. The community facility is not well designed in principle, and M5 noise is unacceptable for future residents.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Liz Parfitt. You have 3 minutes and just press the grey button for the microphone. Let us know when you're ready and we'll start the timer.
Chair, members, thank you for allowing me to speak. The application in front of you presents a catch-22 dilemma. We have serious concerns about the applicant's claim of high standards of active travel alongside negligible real-world cumulative impacts of traffic generated by these three developments. If the applicant intended to provide a healthy development within a stone's throw of sensitive receptors of Bridgewater Hospital, Holden Bower School and the care home, then the active travel or ATE conclusions must inform your decisions today, so this application cannot be accepted as it stands. ATE state that the proposed spine road appears to prioritise the needs of vehicles and non-motorised users, risking higher speeds than are appropriate for an urban environment, while lacking place-making features and risking conflict between pedestrians and cyclists. They point out this is contrary to government guidance in the Manual for Streets and to Somerset Council Placemaking Principles 2024. Yet the applicant questions the right even of ATE to provide a response to this application and then dismisses their response. Without significant improvements, both to the active travel plan for this development and across the highways and public transport networks in the wider surrounding area, there will not be the necessary modal shift towards the active travel behaviours that the applicant infers will almost magically happen. The traffic impacts on the A372 corridor would then materially exceed expected levels. The A372 is part of an interconnected corridor between the A38 St John Street through to Weston-Zoyland, where I'm based. The Bower Lane and Dunweir Junction forms a bottleneck that is wholly inadequate to cope with the increased traffic converging on it from the A39 Bath Road, the Gravity site when up and running, Dunball A38 M5 motorway junction and the wider strategic network. Weston-Zoylanders take twice as long to travel into Bridgewater for work than they did back in 2019, yet lack adequate public transport provision. The cumulative assessment for these three developments estimates 689 additional two-way vehicle movements during the morning peak and around 850 during the evening peak. Movements focused on a corridor that already carries around 12,800 vehicles each day, with the greatest pressure at commuting time. Traffic data has not been substantiated by any recent survey. It fails to consider current or future increases in HGV traffic from industrialisation of Weston-Zoyland Airfield or from the freight routes of the 303 and the A361. HGV traffic cannot currently use Eastern Avenue. Will it be allowed to use this spine road? Frequent closures of the M5 cause gridlock, both through Bridgewater and stasis on Bower Lane and also the Weston-Zoyland Road corridor. So members, before concluding that the highway impacts are acceptable, please consider if you have sufficient confidence that the cumulative effects across the A372, Bower Lane, Dunweir Lane and Dunball corridor and the behavioural assumptions that underpin the traffic forecasts have been fully and robustly demonstrated to be true. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Keith Laws. Keith, if you'd like to come to the table, please. here? No, it doesn't look like. Have we got any submission? Okay. Right. We'll then go on to Caroline Jenkins. No, it doesn't look like Caroline is here. Have we got any submission of what she might have said? Okay. So then we go on to parish council local member representative Elizabeth Brown. Have 3 minutes. If you'd like to let us know when you're starting, and press the grey button for the microphone.
It's on red already, so that's fine. I'm speaking today both as a parish councillor and primary care nurse. The impact on healthcare provision from this mass housing development is one of genuine deep concern to residents. The National Planning Policy Framework requires adequate consideration to be given to cumulative impacts from new developments on healthcare. No contributions were requested for the 790 houses already granted permission for East Bridgwater. If this application is also approved, a total of over 3,500 additional patients will be generated with no concept of how the local NHS will cope. Fact, there has been no new primary care infrastructure since 2013, no plans to provide additional premises or space for existing surgeries to extend, or any land within this application for possible new premises should funding materialise. Bridgwater GP practices have unanimously declared that they cannot absorb any new patients, and that staff and patients will be put at risk without appropriate mitigation. Waiting times are already clinically unacceptable, creating adverse consequences for secondary care and worsening health outcomes for the population. Dr. Bernie Marden, Chief Medical Officer at Somerset ICB, in a recent FOI response to myself, admitted that further housing development will drive further shortfall and capacity pressures, and that further work is required to ensure available funding is directed to developments. Somerset ICB has requested the contribution, as you've heard, of over 416,000, which amounts to approximately £580 per household. This developer stated they cannot afford this obligation. Therefore, this application contravenes Local Plan Policy D28, Health and Social Care. Whilst we understand that this revenue does not provide for operational costs, any funding from central government is not reactive to population increase from major house building, and there is no apparent strategy in place to secure this funding. It is unacceptable to say that these matters will be addressed by the future local plan, as this does not provide any solution to current planning applications already in the pipeline. If the housing numbers in your local plan and its policies can be flagrantly ignored, why should the public have any faith in the local plan process? Lastly, assessment of health risks from building alongside motorways. Bridgwater has a higher than average case of respiratory illnesses. Why is there no air quality data from the M5 corridor available, i.e. from air pollution of frequently standing traffic on the M5? Surely, reliance on modelling and historic data from other sites is both misleading and inadequate. With so many violations of policy and unanswered questions, I would respectfully request that this application is either refused or deferred, because to approve it will put profit before people and create chaos for generations. Bridgwater deserves better.
3 minutes past. Okay, can we then go to Councillor Diego Rodriguez? Please? And it's from when you're ready to start.
Great, thank you. So I won't repeat the points others have made, but I do ask members to consider the points that I make alongside those that others have raised too. Nobody disputes that Bridgwater needs more homes. I certainly don't, but we need the right homes, and that includes homes local families can actually afford. Policy D6 requires 30% affordable housing, and policy B3 expects this strategic allocation to deliver affordable homes as part of creating a sustainable new community. What is before you is a proposal for up to 750 homes, but only 38 affordable homes. Had this application complied with policy, it would be delivering 225 affordable homes. A couple of months ago, this council adopted its housing development strategy. The strategy says increasing the supply of affordable housing is one of Somerset Council's highest priorities. It says social rent remains the most acute housing need in Somerset, and it commits the council to supporting the delivery of more affordable housing through planning applications. You're being asked to approve one of the largest housing developments of Bridgwater with just 38 affordable homes, 187 fewer than our own planning policy would expect. I appreciate the viability arguments, but I ask whether sufficient weight is being given to the council's adopted housing development strategy when reaching this recommendation. If we cannot secure more than 38 affordable homes from a 750 home development, and with more than 12,500 households waiting for an affordable home, then where exactly do we expect to get those affordable homes from? Policy D34 is also clear that the developments of more than 501 dwellings are expected to provide a neighbourhood equipped area for play on site. The officer's report acknowledges that policy, yet the application does not provide an on-site NEEP, instead relying upon the existing facility off-site on the Bower estate. Now, with respect, that is not what the policy says, and Bridgwater Town Council's Parks and Open Space Officer requested that a NEEP should be secured on site, otherwise the application should be rejected. So imagine living in Sydenham. This proposal would be the same as not having Coronation Park in Sydenham and telling all those people in Sydenham to walk over to Bower Park instead. That just simply would not be acceptable. If there isn't room within a development of 750 homes to provide the children's play facilities that our local plan expects, then I respectfully suggest the layout deserves another look before planning permission is granted. I'm asking you to consider a short deferral, which would allow officers and the applicant to explore whether the Affordable Housing Officer can be approved to align more strongly with this council's newly adopted housing development strategy, and how the layout can be amended to provide an on-site NEEP that better reflects our adopted planning policies. Communities are built on bricks, more than bricks and mortar. They're built on affordable homes, the schools, the healthcare, places for children to play, and infrastructure that keeps pace with growth. If we have to water down all those things, Chair, just to make the development viable, then I must say the development is not, then our planning policies are not the problem, it's the development itself. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we go to our final speaker, which is Simon Metcalfe, the planning agent. You have 3 minutes and we'll let us know when we'll start the timer.
Great, thank you. Councillors, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. This proposal is not an unplanned expansion of Bridgwater. It is the last phase of the East of Bridgwater strategic allocation, established through your adopted local plan. The applicant has worked collaboratively with officers over the past 10 years, including through the local plan process, preparing the design principles document, and facilitating the delivery of the SEND school on site. The principle of development on this site has already been accepted through your policy B3. This proposal represents the final component needed to complete the strategic allocation and, importantly, provides the essential infrastructure that other already consented development relies upon. The scheme will provide up to 750 new homes, helping address both the housing needs and Somerset's acknowledged shortfall in housing land supply. However, this application is about more than housing. It delivers the final section of the East of Bridgwater Spine Road, creating the long-planned link between the Bath Road and the Western Zoyland Road. This strategic infrastructure is critical not only for this allocation, but also for the wider area. The proposal delivers a service site for the primary school and community facility, public open space, children's play facilities, ecological enhancements, active travel routes, and the transformation of Bower Lane to a largely traffic-free green route for pedestrians and cyclists. Following a year-long viability assessment process, the council's appointed experts concluded that the application could not afford to provide any affordable housing. However, the applicant is committed to delivering a minimum of 5% affordable housing through reducing profit margins. A review mechanism is also committed to within the Section 106 agreement, such that if market conditions improve, Additional affordable housing and or contributions to the NHS can in the future be secured. Additional affordable housing may also be achieved outside of the Section 106, and the applicant has been actively discussing the site with associations. Planning decisions must be based on evidence, following a careful weighing and planning balance, having regard to the development plan and other material considerations. Key statutory consultees here, including Somerset Highways, National Highways, the Environment Agency and Natural England, have raised no objections to this proposal. Your officers have clearly and robustly concluded that the impacts relating to highways, drainage, flood risk, landscape ecology and sustainability can all be appropriately mitigated through planning conditions and a legal agreement. Importantly, your officers conclude that their proposals accord with the development plan and that the benefits of delivering new homes, strategic infrastructure, open space and improved connectivity outweigh identified harm. On that basis, they recommend approval. Members, this application completes a key part of the planned and committed growth of Bridgwater. In a very challenging economic environment, it delivers homes, including affordable homes, infrastructure and community benefits that have been anticipated for many years, on which the already consented homes on the remainder of the allocation rely. For those reasons, I ask you to support your officer's recommendation and grant planning permission. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes the public speaking time. There are a whole range of issues there that were raised, from water treatment, education, active travel, health, housing development strategy. Officers, would you respond, please, to the matters that have been raised?
Certainly, yes. Thank you, Chair. So just taking some of those issues in turn, I think we'll start with affordable housing and viability. The policy which speaks to affordable housing is policy D6. In that policy, there is a recognition that if viability constraints exist and are evidenced, that a lower provision of affordable housing can be considered. So effectively, the evidence that the applicant has presented and the council's independent viability consultant has assessed is considered by officers to be sufficient to allow that to accord that caveat in the policy effectively, because it is being evidenced, and the evidence, as I said in the presentation, is largely around the abnormal costs, the abnormal construction costs in terms of the surcharging, piling, noise bund, additional specification for the spine road, and other costs of that nature, which equate to the abnormal cost equated to £31 million. And it's those costs which were one of the main constraints really in the viability work. So taking some of the other points in terms of, we heard about Wessex Water and Farewell infrastructure. So Wessex Water don't provide any objection to the scheme that's set out on page 42 of the officer's report. Crime and design. So the crime officer didn't object to the scheme. That's on page 41 of the officer's report. I think to say as well, I mean, largely when you're looking at designing out crime issues, those tend to be when you've got your reserve matters applications, when you're looking at the detailed layout of the scheme. That's when those comments tend to be more relevant to consideration of the scheme. But again, just to say they haven't objected. Education, so the local education authority haven't objected to the scheme. Obviously, they've looked at existing capacity within Bridgwater. There are new schools being opened to the west of the town, and they obviously in their response have required the land to be transferred to the local education authority, which will be in the 106, and contributions. Now, obviously, the contributions aren't considered to be viable, but then I think in discussion with the education authority, they are content not to object, because obviously they have the land coming forward, and they are they're content with the existing capacity in the town on education. Noise, we have various conditions on noise. both instigated through National Highways and the council's environmental health officer. So there's a very detailed condition to set out the exact noise exposure of residents near the noise bund to make sure the noise bund does what it needs to do effectively. There are also no objections from environmental health or air quality. And on active travel, I think we cover this at pages 57 to 58 of the officer's report, Active Travel England. We've considered their response, and I think the key thing we've noted is the financial contribution to improving the walking and cycling infrastructure from the site to the west to the train station and town centre. One of the key elements of that is the enhancements to Barrow Lane, which makes it much more attractive for pedestrians and cyclists. Just looking at some of the other points, I've covered everything. There was a question on the neighbourhood area of equipped play and why one wasn't proposed on the site. Obviously, as the councillor pointed out, there is a need to the south of the site, and in considering whether that's suitable to accommodate the proposed development, officers have had to go to policy D34. D34 basically seeks all new houses to be within 1,000 metres of a NEEP. So we are content that that existing provision with the wider allocation allows for that policy objective to be met, even though it's existing provision off site. I think that was all the points.
It covered education, but any health provision as well?
Yes.
Responsible.
Health provisions. So obviously the NHS initially requested a financial contribution to local GP surgeries. The previous case officer wrote to the NHS that said to ask for details of specific projects in terms of where that money would be spent, because as officers we need to make sure that any financial obligation is evidenced and there's a specific project for it. The NHS responded, and that's in their consultation response, to say they don't have a specific project, but they have a 10-year plan where they're looking to evolve that in more detail. So because of that, officers considered the tests under Still Regulation 122 on currently met to basically allow that financial contribution.
Opening it up to members now for debate. Councillor Bradford.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for all those people that spoke. For insight to what is a very difficult application and a hard decision to make. I reserve the right to come back. I just want to ask a question to start with. One of the speakers mentioned 12,500 people waiting for homes in Bridgewater. And would that be correct?
I'd have to check the exact number.
I was going to say, in terms of the number, there is a ongoing register that's updated on an almost daily basis, and in terms of people looking to access affordable homes. I don't know what the number on that register is currently. Obviously, as members would have heard, the provision of development on this site is 5% affordable housing. The rest of it's open market. We don't currently have a 5-year land supply in any of the areas of Suffolk now, actually. So we are in need as an authority area in terms of additional housing to meet the housing targets set to us by central government.
Thank you for that. I'm going to, sorry to come back. I'm going to something on the stage. I'm just trying to analyse more. Take a bit of analysing and get it right. Try and get it right.
Councillor Hendry.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I'm sure the public. If you didn't know anything about housing estates, housing schemes, etc., you could walk in and somebody put it up on the screen and say, "I'm going to build 750 houses," which I think of that. Say, "Yeah, that's great. That's really nice. When are you going to start?" It's not quite that straightforward, not at all. If you start breaking this down in figures, 750 homes, there's an average of 2.4 persons per home. That's 1,800 people. Big or small, makes no difference, they're still there. About 40% of homes nowadays have a dog. And there's roughly 12 cars for every 10 homes. There's a reason for me telling you all this, because once you start adding the figures up and breaking down, you think, like, that's a lot of people, a lot of dogs, a lot of houses and car movements. It's all very well saying, yes, we have a leap or a lap. That wasn't actually clarified to me, to be honest. And if houses have 750 homes, if it's a leap, which it should be, there should be more than one anyway for that amount of children that's going to be there, because there obviously will. Schools, doctor surgery, dentists, they all come into play. You can't expect people to use the same ones that's in the town, and whether they mentioned or not makes no difference. They should absolutely cast down and put in place without any doubt about it. Going back to the children, the leap and the lamp, you have to have nowadays, especially for this amount of property, a dog walking area, a proper dog, like a small field, patch of grass, whatever the case. Simply because if you don't, you eventually find people taking their dogs for a walk inside the children's play area, the leap and the lamp, as you will. But you get dog walkers going in there, and I don't have to explain this for you. You have to finish up in a terrible mess because it has happened down the road before. No problem. I think I've got this figures right here, 30 affordable homes to be built to be put in there, and it should be around 225, 225. Will I get that right or not? Check those figures right. Yeah, 225, yeah, that's all got down there. This is one of the largest housing projects, if not the largest, that's going around this area. Really, it is big, no doubt about that at all. There's quite a few things on here that should be rejigged to make things different to what it is. So on the face of it, it's not just a case of sat down looking at 750 new homes. Yes, how soon do they start? It's just not that straightforward. Yes, we need new homes around here. There's no doubt about that at all. And as a councillor's friend here said, about 12,000 in line. I'm not sure about that. That would have to be checked and put out to me. But for this moment in time, as I'm sat here just now, I think this definitely should be deferred. Go back and be looked at, and a lot of things are meant to look into, because it doesn't stack up the way that it's not right. Thank you for the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Hendry. Councillor Pilner.
Thank you. I think members have got a really difficult application today, because this is in so many different parts. So this is an allocation that within the local plan. The numbers are higher, but the local plan doesn't stipulate them as a maximum. It stipulates them as a minimum that we're aiming for. So we can't simply turn it down because the numbers are higher. And as was mentioned, obviously the other two sites that came up before are a particular density of development. If this one simply met the numbers, it would be out of line with that. So again, there's a logic to where the officers are on this. The planners can only go on the evidence they have in front of them a certain way, and the difficulty we have, and I think a lot of the comments that have been made by residents are spot on. But the issue with Wessex is they are the people we have to consult, and they haven't objected. They haven't objected. So for us to turn it down, we need evidence. We know from our own experience there are problems, but as we know from other applications in the past, lived experience doesn't trump evidence, and that's where we struggle at the moment with a number of these things. I am frankly amazed that the NHS hasn't asked for something. We had this come up on one of the previous applications, and we had exactly the same situation. NHS hadn't said what they needed. This thing's been in the system for years. This hasn't just been dropped on people. And for the NHS to come back and say, "Oh, we're working on a 10-year plan. Come back to us when we're ready." We can't. We have applications in front of us. We have to decide. And if we don't decide them, then applicants are perfectly at liberty to go straight to the inspectorate and say, "This is being delayed unreasonably. You sort it out." And at that point, we as the local authority don't get any input. We've lost our control. Air quality again. Absolutely agree with some of the comments made by the speakers, but our own environmental health don't give us the evidence to say no. So I'm still waiting to make a decision finally on this, but at the moment the difficulty we have is all the issues that are being raised are quite reasonable issues. I can't disagree with them, but equally for planners and for us to turn around and say this is being deferred or this is being reviewed, we have to give a reasonable reason, argument as to why we're doing that. And at the moment, I'm struggling to get that. So I'll be happy to hear the rest of the debate.
Thank you. It was just wanted to pick up a few things from Councillor Hendry and just sort of reaffirm with Councillor Filmer. Really in terms of it is an allocated housing site in the local plan, so it's adopted for residential development. The policy B3 says about 1,200. The design principles document was adopted slightly later, increases that to sort of 1,300 and something. If you're looking at it in terms of density, because I think it became clear when one of the other applications came before members, that actually the volume in the allocation and the volume as set out in the plan document would be greater than what was originally set out, and that's because of the density of development. So if you look at the density of development, it was touched on in terms of the presentation that if we did limit it to the number, we would be under developing an allocated housing site in the local plan, which is actually a reason for refusal under the NPPF. So if you're then looking at what the density would be versus what is reasonable, the density of this land parcel in terms of the developable areas for housing is 25.5 dwellings per hectare, which is completely within, so normally the comfort rating is sort of 25 to 30. Within the DPD, it actually said 35 to 45, but that was over the site area overall. So it is difficult. It is an allocated housing site. It's a hybrid. So in terms of the detailed layout of the land parcels, how we would respond to the crime and design comments, that type of thing, that would follow in the later reserve matters applications. In terms of the issues for drainage and drainage capacity, we've gone out to Wessex Water. They're raising no objection on the planning application. So it's not something for the planning application we can use the same as an objection on this stage. In terms of area for dogs, in terms of the 106, there are requirements to deliver the play spaces that they've said. In terms of the proximity of this site to the NEEP, officers satisfied that it's close enough that people would actually benefit from both areas. There's also a requirement within the heads terms for 2.88 hectares of open space, whether that's a dog walking area or footpaths or an open green area is again down to later applications. And in terms of air quality, again, we haven't got an objection from Environmental Health in that respect. And for noise, National Highways did comment on the application. They are recommending conditions. The conditions are imposed at the back end of the application. So I fully appreciate the concerns that are being raised. A lot of them will come down to the detailed matters or reserve matters. Point of confirmation for the NHS is they did actually give us an amount of money. They said, please, can I have this amount of money? In making sure that all of the obligations are reasonable, we have to test them against, are they necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms? Are they directly related to the development? Are they fairly and reasonably related in scale and kind to the development? So because of the value on it and the viability concerns, we did go back to the NHS and say, that's fine. What projects is this money going towards? And it's that bit they couldn't answer. So they did have an amount they were requesting. We did. But it's because they haven't evidenced what it would go towards addressing. So we can't confirm it would meet those tests. It may be that when we get to the point of doing the viability assessment, if they're more advanced on their plan, they've got a specific project, and then we've got more wriggle room in the viability. It's down to members so much as anyone else in terms of, would you want any of that surplus either going to the NHS or going to increase affordable housing provision? Because it's affordable housing that took the knock on this one in terms of other provisions. And I know there were discussions about other obligations and, perhaps we should think about it differently and slice it differently. The list of heads terms are set out in the report. The viability is what the viability is. It's been independently scrutinised by a viability expert. So the question will be, if members don't like the way the cake has been sliced, how would you reslice it? Because the cake is what you've got. The slicing is as recommended in the heads terms, but it's before members as a recommendation, and for the reasons I've set out. I think that was it. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got councillor Slocum, councillor Bruce, and then I'll go back to you, councillor Hendry.
Thank you, Chairman. I think respectfully, I've listened today to the speakers all spoke very well. And I know the amount of work, but I'm going to tell the officers, I don't like the cake. I don't like the cake. I don't like how it's sliced. The cake's just not big enough. It's just not, either it's too big or it's too small. I feel I cannot support something if an application cannot deliver 30% affordable homes. We are desperate for homes. We are desperate. And maybe the cake should be sliced in a different way. I think the application either needs to be reduced. I think it feels to me it's a slight bit of greediness here with this application. They want all the amount of housing, but they don't actually want to give anything back. It feels like that. Apologies if that's wrong, but that's how it feels. And I believe that the NHS should be given more time. The NHS are on a 10-year plan. They probably can't say to you what the thing is, what their projects are at the moment. I know that because I'm chair of adult social care, so I know it's very difficult for them, and we will pick this up with them. But I believe today the most important thing for us for having a development of this size is the fact that we need homes. We need homes. We need affordable homes. We need homes to put people in. And to cut this cake up and taking out the most important factor, I would not be able to support it. I'm sorry.
Can I say to the audience, appreciate this is a really emotive application, and I absolutely get it, but we're not a cabaret here, and we need space to debate things. We're in a really tricky situation here because as you're hearing from everybody, the ones that have spoken are really uncomfortable with this, but we've got to have a planning reason if we are going to defer or whatever to do that, and we need the space to do it without cheering or booing. You haven't booed, and thank you for that, but can you please remain quiet and give us the space to debate it so that we try and come up with the best solution possible? Thank you. Councillor Bruce.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions, so I'll just go ahead and then let you give me the answers to those afterwards, if that's okay. In terms of density, can you just remind me, and you may have said it earlier, I might not have caught it, and I might have heard it. Did both of the previous schemes go over their original allocation in terms of density? Then regarding the drainage board objection, can you confirm, does the delegated authority only allow permission to be issued once officers are satisfied that that objection has been formally resolved and withdrawn? Can you confirm also that section 106 secures 5% affordable housing as an absolute minimum obligation, and that the viability review mechanism is upward only, so capable of increasing contributions if viability improves, but not reducing the committed affordable housing provision below 5%? Can you also confirm that any future viability uplift can be used to move affordable housing provision closer to the adopted 30% policy requirement, that there will be no cap on the amount of additional affordable housing that may be secured through the review mechanism? And then lastly, clearly the report identifies significant shortfalls against the adopted policy requirements for affordable housing and infrastructure contributions. For the record, can you please clarify whether those policy conflicts could reasonably support a defendable refusal reason if members were minded to refuse? Thank you.
Thank you. If I pass over to Luke will respond to whatever is possible, and then I'll pick up anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Councillor. To answer your first question on density. So just to look at the numbers, Bullets Farm, outline planning permission for 530 dwellings. That was a gross density of 25 dwellings per hectare. Bower Farm, outline permission for 260 dwellings. That was a gross density of 29 dwellings per hectare. I think in terms of whether or not they took more than was envisaged, I think there was probably a looseness in the policy. So basically allow, I suppose, a more efficient layout of those schemes. So effectively, it was recognised at the time that the increased density of those sites would mean that it was likely the allocation overall, the 1,200 would be exceeded. If that kind of answers your question on density.
Just, yeah, so just to confirm then, so both of those really were over the original allocation, those densities that you just said.
I don't think it was that they were over the allocation because there wasn't really a.
I think that the answer technically is no, because the allocation was 1,200, but the allocation was 1,200 for the whole of that site. So proportionally, if you broke that down to the site areas of the two previous sites, then they should have been lower density, but a density of 25 and a density of 29 dwellings per hectare was considered acceptable on each of the sites when considered in isolation, but also in combination with each other and whatever the future phase looks like. The future phase, as is for 4 members today, has been considered and looked at by all statutory consultees in the context of the other approved plans. So it's been looked at cumulatively in terms of the net increase above and beyond the allocation, but technically the allocation was 1,300. And at the point we were consenting the second application, the actual number in the allocation hadn't been breached. But if you were dividing the parcels proportionately, then both of them would have over delivered against the 1,300. But I think that was also acknowledged in the design principles document that followed the allocation in the local plan, which also projected a greater number on top of that. So it was looking at actually with sort of development constraints, bear in mind we didn't know what an appropriate buffer to the M5 and noise mitigation looked like, how much of the land that may have sterilised in terms of making sure there's an appropriate environment for everyone else. So the density has been greater than originally anticipated in terms of the actual policy wording and even the DPD, but taken in conjunction with the two sites, actually there's no material harm as a result of the increased density. In terms of the IDB, at the first point we were drafting this application to come before members, it had an IDB objection because of the maintenance margin for the green next to the motorway, because the margin was 5.5 metres instead of 6. So 6 is the standard, 5.5 is what was shown. The earth fund, which has the noise mitigation on top, is a detailed matter for this application. So in discussion with the IDB before we finalised the drafting of the report, the noise fund got moved half a metre further into the site to enable the 6 metre margin. So the only thing that's changed in the recent set of consultation that's currently live for 14 days is the earth fund moving half a metre into the site to enable a 6 metre margin instead of 5.5 metre margin. In discussion with the IDB ahead of the agenda set, they are happy with that in principle, subject to conditions. The draft conditions are at the end of the report, but subject to tweaking, because in terms of how you sign off surface water drainage for 750 dwellings, it's likely to need to be done in phases. So the wording at the moment doesn't quite match with that, which is why part of the recommendation at the end is to allow delegated authority for officers to do minor tweaks to the wording of the condition to make sure it works with the phasing of the development. In terms of the 106, it does absolutely secure 5%. That is an absolute minimum. As part of the review, it would be an upward only review clause. So it wouldn't go down as part of the review, but it would allow an upward generation towards affordable housing if viability suggests that at that point. It doesn't currently have a cap to restrict any further affordable housing. That said, I've also been made aware of a site recently where some grant funding's gone in to result in additional affordable housing, taking it above and beyond what was originally anticipated. So actually the wording of it at the moment, 106 is always something that happens post committee, but we wouldn't cap it to be any less than policy compliant. The question might be, if we get to policy compliance, you know, would you word something in there to cap it at policy compliance, just to make sure you've got a balanced community? And in terms of, I think the last question was about infrastructure and the under delivery of infrastructure, and whether that would be a material reason in terms of concern. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, just to clarify, it wasn't just about infrastructure, it's also about the, obviously, the healthcare provision and the education.
Yeah.
So basically the contributions in general, that shortfall, that there is.
Yeah, so the viability puts us in the best position we can be in the circumstances in terms of allowing the review and resultant uplift, if it demonstrates it's available. It is something that weighs against the application in determining the planning application because the policy says 30% affordable housing. It doesn't provide 30% affordable housing. So the fact it's not able to deliver policy compliant affordable housing is a negative point that weighs against the development. When you are weighing up the balance of the development, what you have to look at is how that balances against everything else. So in balancing everything else, it's an allocated housing site. It's delivering 750 homes when we haven't got a 5-year land supply. We haven't got any objections from any statutory consultees. We are securing some affordable housing, nowhere near policy compliant, but we are providing some. All of this weighs in favour of the development. The fact we haven't got a 5-year land supply also tips the balance in presumption in favour of development as well. So the under provision of the costings is something that weighs against it, but officers are of the view that if you balance that against everything else weighing for it, that's why we're recommending it's recommended for grant of permission.
But I understand that's not the reason behind your recommendation, so you just confirming would not be reasonable grounds for us, not defendable for us to reject it on the basis that it doesn't provide those contributions.
You would have to justify how the weight of that one element outweighs all of the other benefits of the scheme. So I would raise caution if you're wanting to review that on that basis. But if members felt that imbalance was so significant that it's a reason for refusal, it is a matter for the members, but it is something that weighs against it, but it has to be weighed against all the other benefits of the delivery of the allocated housing site.
Have Councillor Hendry and then Councillor Murphy, did you want to wish to speak? Councillor Hendry first.
Thank you, Chair. I promise not to clap my boot. Can I speak? I'm just going to let you do. Okay, a couple of points I'd like to clear up here. I'm still not sure about this. I actually don't like this at all. Anyway, 750 houses, which is a reduced number down from where it's 1,200, 1,001. Are we saying that the houses are put on a parcel of land that was allocated first for the 1,200, or is that a separate parcel of land which in waiting could another application come through for more, because this is what fits these 750 houses? Moving on from that, statutory consultees, I think as far as I know, so I can read that everybody's on board, but they don't take into account everything. They only go highways and ecology, etc., things like that. So moving on from that, you've not given me a proper answer here. My glasses on. You've not really given a proper answer about things like a dentist, a school, shops, even a pub, for example, to be down that area, because the right? Okay. Well, I don't drink that. I don't know. Anyway, that's where we are with this. I'm not really getting proper answers, but my overall opinion that this rights is sitting at this minute at all, I can't vote for this, not at all. Things have to be rejected. I'm not happy with some of the answers, but I would like to know about the parcels of land, the 750 to 1,200, how that balances out. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor, so if I could answer your question on the 750 and 1,200 dwelling relationship. So on the screen, I've just gone back to the slide, which is the appendix in the local plan. So effectively, this shows the entire allocation. So policy B3, this is the allocation where policy B3 talks about 1,200 homes. So the planning application we're currently looking at is within this area. So it's largely, like Chris is showing it, is good. So it's largely from this area to the northern end of the site, because the plan's tilted, down to roughly here. That's the 750. Further south is Bower Farm, and that's the development which is north of Western Zorland Road, where that new roundabout is in. So the relationship is this 750 is the substantial portion of the 1,200 dwelling allocation. And you also asked questions on pubs and dentists, and what is envisaged there. So I mean, other than the community area effectively within the scheme, which obviously Reserve Matters will come forward and show exactly what will go there. There are no specific proposals for pubs and dentists within this scheme, and the policy doesn't really seek those types of facilities. So we don't consider, officers wouldn't consider the lack of those to generate a policy conflict per se. Thank you.
I think the only thing I'd just add to that is obviously within the middle of the site, so it kind of looks deep purple in that one. There is an allocated housing site, so that's secured through the HITS terms in terms of offering that area of land up to the Education Authority in terms of provision of the school site within this element of the allocation.
Councillor Murphy, did you wish to speak? Oh, you do. Thank you.
Not that one. I get this one. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm equally puzzled by this and equally concerned and feeling equally emotional about it in some respects. I am concerned about the way that we speak about some more houses, some more. We're talking about a few more of this and a few more of that. We've allowed them to go ahead, or we're allowing them, it looks like we want to allow them to go ahead and build more houses that are standard houses, for sale houses, not affordable houses. And then when we look at the affordable houses, it strikes me that nobody mentions the term 95% reduction. Not just we all say 5%, we're getting 5%. We're also getting 95% minus. It's just so awful that we are going, this is one of the worst cases I've seen of this 95% reduction in what was promised as a very good substantial contribution to affordable houses. The other thing that's bothering me is I notice that there has been no assessment of the standing traffic on the M5 for pollution. No assessment whatsoever. We have the M5, which has the worst possible traffic congestion and accident rate. We had a meeting in Somerset, I have to say, with 4 policemen who were responsible for the traffic, and they said there's not a lot they can do about it. They can't build another road. And so here we are, and we're looking at a development which nobody's had a look at the pollution. And I find that very difficult in this age that we're talking about kids and they're worried about. And also I see that there's changes that were proposed in the bund, not the bund, in the fences. I saw something about 3 meters to 2 meters, and they're not too sure what they can do. And it strikes me that and also in terms of the number of houses we're talking about, there's not just the number of houses, they've added another half story on top. And I think, how's that? Is that another way of making money? Is that another way of getting more houses without getting more houses? Because they're all sitting on top. And I am convinced, when I've seen several of these very nasty and comprehensive and helpful and all that developments, what about the parking? There's no mention here, because obviously it's not that time. It's not time for parking. But what I discover is when we get to the point where we're looking at parking, I'm willing to bet these places have got block parking, up to 20 parking spaces for each one of these high-rise buildings. They're not high-rise, they're 2.5 stories, it's something different. But you're going to have block parking. these people are going to try and get as much out of this site as possible, and I don't think that's acceptable. I think that is to be looked at more carefully than it's being looked at the moment. And I know that a number of people have said, yes, they're concerned, but I am also concerned because I think this is classic overdevelopment in their favour. And so I would have to say, I'm grateful for all the little bits and pieces of open space and this and that. That's really makes it up. But it's a big project. It's another by the motorway project. Frankly, I just can't understand it. And as I drive up the motorway now, I look at these fences and they vary. They vary in size. I don't even know what thickness they are. They don't even talk about specifications for thickness. So they don't talk about what stops. All I know is I've been around in houses that have got these fences, and my God, I don't know what noise they stop. So I'd like to find out more detail about this. I don't think we have got enough detail to make a full decision. We are not being informed completely as we should be. And so I'm going to shut up now. And I just wanted to say that. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak, Madam Chair.
Thank you, councillor Murphy. Did respond?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Murphy. So just to address some of your points and your questions there. So just to clarify, I mean, you referred to a 95% reduction in affordable housing. It probably, I mean, really when we're thinking about the percentages, we're thinking about the 30% policy requirement and the 5% offer from the applicant. So really, it's if anything, 25%.
It's playing with numbers, isn't it?
So effectively, there's would say 25% reduction, but it's the difference between 5% and 30% effectively in terms of what's being offered and what is technically required under policy. You then queried the air quality in relation to the M5 motorway. So on page 24 of the report, there's reference to the air quality assessment submitted with the application, which demonstrates that no adverse impacts on air quality are identified. And again, I think my colleague mentioned earlier there was an objection from the council's environmental health officer.
May I just say to you, thank you very much, but you did state earlier that there is no assessment of the standing traffic that's stopped on the motorway. Now, if you want to query that, please query it with the fact that, but I remember vividly, no, there's been no assessment. And that's all I said. Forgive me for interrupting you. I apologize.
That's fine. If I move on to your other point around 2.5 story dwellings. So again, I've just brought this plan up on the screen just to help with this point. So this is the building height parameter plan. The yellow really shows the predominant nature 2-story development, and the spine road would see up to 2.5 story height. So we officers consider that to be a minor increase in height, but just allowing a framing of that road without unnecessarily going, too high in terms of building heights. So we think that's a good balance in terms of height. You also asked about parking, of course, and concern around parking. So on page 80 of the officer's report, you'll see various conditions. One of the conditions offered by the local highway authority is that details of parking need to be agreed through condition, but obviously also through the reserve matters application. And there's absolutely scope within reserve matters applications to make sure officers and members are happy with how parking is being proposed. And then you obviously queried the potential overdevelopment of the site, and I think we probably just refer back to those points when we discussed density before, that the density of this scheme at 750 dwellings is a consistent density at 25 dwellings per hectare gross, a consistent density with other parts of the wider strategic allocation which have already been approved. And I think, that was all your questions.
May I?
If you wish to come back.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. I thank you very much for being so patient with me. I appreciate that. It's interesting for me to hear you say that we will be able to look at the parking in the future. But you don't know, do you? And this is what I'm thinking. You haven't got an idea of what is being, of the ammunition that's being used against you in some respects. Here we have, you said you're perfectly happy with them putting an extra bit on top of the building. But we normally have 2 stories as a standard. We don't allow an extra, but you are happy to stay there quite glibly, nicely. Well, you know, it's only an extra, it's only an extra. But that's why we're here. We don't want an extra. And then, of course, on the other hand, we do have this question of the parking, which when it comes later, there won't be enough room. And I've watched this happen with a number of schemes here. In this very room. And we walked around, people have almost been crying because there's no space for kids to play. So forgive me for being outrageous, I'm sorry. I am sorry. But I am very worried about this. I don't know quite how to stop it, but I'm worried.
Can I just say, because there are some more speakers, can we please respect our planning officer? This is a very difficult application and there's been a huge amount of work. But I absolutely understand where everyone is coming from. But can we remember
My apologies.
to be respectful, please? Thank you. Councillor Bradford.
Madam Chairman. The fact is, we haven't got a 5-year land supply. Otherwise, this would be a lot easier to decide today. Really good. But the overriding thing down this meeting is probably the affordable housing. Affordable housing. Everybody mentioned affordable housing. And it's a hell of a drop from what it was to what it is. And I'm just wondering that whether we could defer maybe this meeting and go away and look at some of these figures. The trouble is when you start messing with figures, you rob Peter to pay Paul. You want everything else in the planning applications, therefore affordable homes drop down. So you might have to do something else so your affordable homes go up. That's how it all works. You see, it's a real heavy negotiation, heavy business. So I just wonder sometimes where that could be done now. I don't know what you think about that, because if we go and turn it down, there's a fair chance today that it will go to appeal, and I would think it would cost an awful lot of money to Somerset Council if they lost it. That's what I feel. I'm trying to put it all from the head here, and really, there's no really easy answer. But I do the deferring perhaps and go back and talk about a few more figures, adjusting a few figures there, So that comes to affordable housing. If you've got to do something else, maybe so.
Thank you. So to cover off that point and an earlier point in terms of whether members have got enough information in front of them to make the decision, the application is EIA development. So the application was supported with environmental impact assessment information, environmental statements. It's all on the planning online file, but obviously we have tried to present that to members in a way that condenses that information, but that does include chapters on cumulative assessments for the sites, screening and scoping, the screening report, ecology, biodiversity, noise and vibration, water environment, air quality, traffic and transport, looking at alternatives, policy, and then the methodology and the non-technical summary as well. So all of that information is in the background of the report. It's not that this is a report, this application is half-baked in front of members, but there's a lot of information that's gone into the background and coming to the conclusions that are in front of members today. In terms of the obligations, with any obligation deficit, if we're looking at something that goes against policy compliance, the internal process that's currently operating within Somerset is that the outcome of the balancing of where the money goes and how we slice that pie goes to a service directors meeting. So this one went to a service directors meeting with the head of affordable housing, with the head of sort of Kirsty Larkin effectively watches over it. We take it to her with a kind of, this is where we are, this is what the viability says, these are the different options, and therefore we think our only option is this. Do we have support in the round as a council wide approach? Because if it's always affordable housing taking the hit, eventually corporately that becomes unsustainable. So anything that is affecting provision of affordable housing is now going through internal audit through service directors, which happened before it came to you guys at planning committee with the recommendations as they're currently set out. But as it is with the review mechanism, affordable housing obviously disappointed. We haven't got a policy compliant position, but we have got the mechanism to try and uplift that where we can. So as officers, we've done everything we can to get it to a point where it's policy compliant. There were discussions about the numbers and 750 being too many. If you take 750 and reduce it, proportionately, all of these benefits also go down. So the potential is you'd end up with less than 5% affordable housing because everything decreases if you take away the volume of development as well. It's a really difficult issue to juggle with. And it is just simply the abnormal costs in terms of that particular allocated site was always a bit known in terms of needing to surcharge the site and the needing to pile to get the development in there in the first place, and then the noise attenuation measures that are needed because of the proximity to the M5. But with all of those measures in place, this is where we've got to in terms of the obligations.
Thank you. Councillor Bolt, apart from myself, you're the only one that hasn't spoken yet, so you're next.
Thank you. I always understood, and I think I'm right in saying that our plan is a living document. And when it was developed, we didn't have the issues we did on the M5. Now with the Folletts Farm and the other one, we raised the issues on air quality and what monitoring was done. And from memory, the air quality monitoring isn't 24/7, 365 days a year. Is there any air quality monitoring being done at the school or at the hospital that we can base some statistics to know exactly what it is? What was it? We've had about 9 or 10 shutdowns, one for best part of a day and a half. Vehicles are being run. They don't switch their engines off because they need the aircon on. I'm more concerned about the health of any estate along that section. I've raised it at Folletts. I've raised it, I call it Strawberry Farm. Is the information available to us to say when the monitoring was done?
I'm going to go for a holding response while Luke's looking everything up. The answer is yes, because there is an air quality assessment chapter on the EIA, so that would have been subject to monitoring at the time it was drafted. Appreciate the application has been with us, a number of years to get to this stage. So the modelling was done, or the quality assessment was done in 2023, I think. The guidance was updated, but they were happy that it didn't change the outcomes in terms of what they were looking at. In terms of what they were looking at generally, they looked at the difference between the operational phase in terms of during the construction process, but then also the sort of final stages of when it's occupied and up and running for development. And I'm kind of hoping I've held enough that Luke can actually find the information that you want, because I'm just buffering really. But there is a whole chapter on it in terms of environmental statement.
Could I make a suggestion? I think somebody's said something about deferring. If this is going to be a long haul to find out specifically when this monitoring's done and everything else, maybe it should be.
Annoyingly, I'm looking at tables in the ES that actually shows what monitoring was done and where it was done, and what streets it was done. I'm just trying to find the conclusion for members. But effectively, the outcome is environmental health was satisfied with it and raised no objection.
I mean, we know the date of the report was 5th of January 2023, and obviously that's reflective of the time the application was originally submitted. It's probably not quite clear from the report when the monitoring was undertaken, but no doubt that the environmental health officer would have reviewed the how recent the information was when they were considering their response, and you would have hoped that if the survey data was, too old, that effectively the environmental health officer would have raised an issue with that. That's, of no point raised any concern on that.
If I could come back, January and the rest of the year are considerably different with the usage on the motorway. All our shutdowns happen usually between April through till October. I know that and it has always been on that section of the motorway, but it's even worse now with the volume of traffic. Instead of having 7 or 8 a year, it's like every other weekend, 3 days we're shut. My question for that is the monitoring done through the year? That's what I said. It isn't just a one-off monitoring when it's quiet at night when there's no traffic.
It wouldn't have been acceptable as an environmental statement to have a one-off monitoring event. It would need to have been a series of monitoring events and then prediction and flow of it. So there is a section in it that says about future exposure. It says annual mean NO2, PM10 and PM2.5 concentrations were predicted across the proposed development for 2032 DS scenario at a height of 1.5 metres to represent exposure across ground floor level as shown in figures ES 7.6 and ES 7.8. The background NO2, PM10 and PM2.5 levels are likely to be lower at elevated levels owing to increased distance from emission sources such as roads. Therefore, predicted concentrations at heights above ground floor level are considered acceptable in regard to future exposure and have not been assessed further. So, but that's one extract of a 46-page document about environmental statement and impacts and assessments. Ultimately, sorry, I'm just going to say the conclusion was based on the results of the dispersion modelling assessment. The site was considered to be suitable for proposed end use without implementation of mitigation techniques to protect future site users from elevated PM10 and PM2.5 concentrations. As such, increases in PM10 and PM2.5 concentrations as a result of the development are considered to have negligible effects on the proposed site users, which was the conclusion of the ES.
With regards to that, we've always told in D25 that it's for future users. And I'm looking at health, that motorway is not going to get any better. I'd like to know that this is being done on a continual basis, especially when it shuts down through the summer. That's when the kids are going to be off school. That's when the kids are going to be at 1.5 metres.
I think the only thing I can say is the information we've got with the environmental statement shows it's not a problem. The consultative responses we've got raise it as no objection, haven't raised it as an issue, don't require mitigation. So if they are satisfied with the outcomes, if members require further information or more data to satisfy them further on this aspect, it could be referred on that basis, but we do have a lot of detailed information to cover this off currently in front of members. So it's whether members feel that's justified in terms of recommendation.
I think it's whether members accept the way that the application is, because you could give us a lot of information, but it wouldn't change anything in terms of the overall what we have before us. You know, I'm stating what's been stated before and the obvious. This site is in the local plan for housing. It's been there for a long time. It would be very surprising if it didn't end up as housing. However, it's landed on this committee with conditions and in a state that we do not find acceptable. That's the problem. And the problem is that all these statutory consultees haven't found a problem. So we're at the stage where we need to start thinking of what we're going to do about this, because we've got to come up with some resolution. So we've been talking about the targets, whether priorities, do we have any influence on the priorities that have been set within the report. For example, still, I think it's 3 million set aside for that. I'm not sure what that is to be spent on. And there's 900,000, is it for junction 24 improvements? But, you know, taking the comments that were made by one of the speakers about education and the siting of the school, and the fact that there's an expectation that school provision probably won't meet the demand for such a large area of housing, the expectation they will move around the town. Well, those of us that move around the town regularly know how congested it is. So we're trying to make something better that fits, which must fit in within this site, which is allocated for housing. So it's knowing what potential we have to affect some changes in the thinking of where the finance that available is, that pie we've been talking about, where tweaks can be made so that we can hopefully end up with more affordable housing. And what capability have we got in terms of deferring for a review of really the whole wider scheme?
Yeah, so in terms of what scope have you got, the pie and how it's sliced is set out on page 25, the numbers on 3.1, but it's effectively as replicated in the slide in front of members at the moment. Those are the obligations, including your financial obligations that are being asked for from the development, which would be secured through 106, if approved. If members were not happy with the 5% affordable housing, the question would be, what would you want to remove from this list to make the affordable housing better, healthier? And then the question would be, what would be the planning implications of removing whatever it is you're removing to increase affordable housing? So in terms of what you've got and what you can play with, it's 3.1, and this is the balance, and this is how we've done it at the moment for officers. In terms of education, we haven't got an objection from the Education Authority. There is an allocated area of land within the middle of the site. It's proposed to be given to the Local Highway Authority. The Local Highway Authority is satisfied with it, subject to it being secured through 106. So I do understand, and I heard the speaker's point and the concerns about children and if there aren't enough capacity. In terms of school place demands, and I've certainly experienced this on other sites that I fought very hard for, very urgent school sites that were immediately needed. A few years down the line, they're suddenly not needed because it's all done on birth rates and birth rate fluctuation. So it does fluctuate year to year in terms of demand and what is needed when. In terms of the amount of space that is available for the school site, the Local Education Authority are satisfied. So there's not a cause for concern by officers or the local education authority in terms of educational provision, if that gives members any reassurance. But effectively, it's 3.1 that sets out the obligations and how we're currently balancing it. If members want to have a look at removing some of the obligations on 3.1 that would be repurposed into affordable housing, but if elements are removed, there will be things that they are going towards that would then weigh against the application.
That's what we're trying to say earlier on, Madam Chairman. We're trying to make that point. If people interfere with the 3.1 million still, the council will get that money. Sorry, it's taken a long time to get through that one.
Okay, we have some more speakers who've requested to speak, and then I think we do need to be thinking of some resolution for this, because we'll end up going back into that. So I've got councillors Bruce, Slocum, Hendry and Phil now. So, Hilary.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's probably worth saying thank you very much to the planning officers for all the work that you're putting onto this, and none of it's personal. We're all very emotive on this subject, but thank you to what you're doing. Going back a little bit slightly, the number of people that are registered on Home Finder. So I've been involved in the affordable housing discussion and viability and stuff because of the Task and Finish group on the Adults Health and Housing Scrutiny Committee that we're doing at the moment. The number at the moment, as of January this year, was 13,250. So considerably higher still than the 12,000 that were mentioned earlier. I'm still concerned about the NHS contribution. Mentioned earlier about the fact that when you'd come back to the NHS and you'd asked for what projects they wanted to put the money towards, the money that requested, they didn't come back with anything. I think it's probably worth noting that the ICB is undergoing restructure at the moment. There are considerable challenges for the ICB and the NHS. We, at the last scrutiny committee meeting, had the NHS come to us about the GP provision, and they were unable really to give us accurate data or forecasts because of the difficulty that they're having with getting all the different systems between the GPs. So getting all that data together, they actually don't have the right data. I think without the right data, they're having difficulty planning and the restructuring of the ICB. So for them not to come forward with specific projects, probably not that much of a surprise to me because of what they're going through at the moment. My question really is, if they were to be consulted again and given time to come back with some projects, or if they'd given projects at the time, what would that have changed? If they'd been able to say, oh yes, we want that money because we want it for X project and Y project, would that have changed anything on this application? And if we were to defer and give them more time to do that, would it make a difference? I think also I wanted to say I appreciate the fact that this application is really important in terms of providing that fine road and making Bower Lane safe for pedestrians and cyclists, because at the moment it's definitely not. So I understand the importance of this, and I'm worried about it not going ahead. It sounds ridiculous, but I think we're all in the same situation, completely torn, because it needs to go ahead. You've already got two developments going. You need that spine road in, you need the safety for pedestrians. But without the provision of the GP healthcare and the education provision, it just can't. And I think if we were to have some reassurances, I think the speaker might have been, forgive me if I don't remember correctly, but it might have been on behalf of the applicant, said about the fact that discussions are ongoing with housing association, registered providers, about the possibility of maybe, even if it's not the official affordable housing, I think it's called additional housing. It would be good to have that locked down a bit. What discussions are going on? Is it positive? What are the potential outcomes of that? So is there any alternative funding that we can access? If we've got more security in terms of knowing that we're putting this application through, knowing that what the developer can't provide can be provided in another manner, I would feel more confident about it. At the moment, I'm heading towards rejecting it, even though I'm worried we might lose on appeal. I'm probably more towards deferring, but we need to put together a big package of what we want to see when it comes back to us. I don't think we, as committee members of the planning committee, I don't think we're best placed to decide how that plan is to be split up. I think the viability is something that we're discussing, scrutiny committee and everything. So it's a much bigger issue, but I do think service directors are probably the best placed people to decide once they've got the steer, the political steer, in terms of what the priorities are for the council. Then the service director, the best, they know what's going on, they know where things are needed. I'm quite happy with leaving it with service directors, but at the moment, without the provision of these services, I think it would be madness to let this application go ahead and let these houses be built without being able to provide some reassurances to the current and future residents of these developments that they are viable to live in. You know, that they are not going to be a place, to be honest, because that's what we're looking at the moment. I'm really sorry, but that's the way I feel about it at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just, in terms of what changes, if we'd have had a justified figure from the NHS and they'd been prescriptive in terms of what actual projects that delivers locally, that is linked to, geographically linked to this location, so we're satisfied it complies with the test, that it's reasonable, it's necessary, it's required to make the development acceptable, then the question is, what do you lose off of that list of obligations that we're currently looking to secure? Because the viability is what the viability is. The viability has been independently tested. The cost of what's on the screen in front of members at the moment is the cost of what can be supported by the development. So if there were a justified ask from the NHS of, I'm going to pick £130,000 because my brain's not working very well, I would suggest, looking at the costs, I'd probably remove that from the Dunwall roundabout improvement scheme. But that would then be a highway issue in that this scheme would have under-delivered the required contribution towards the Dunwall roundabout improvement scheme. And how that gets balanced back out internally is another headache for another department of the council if we rebalance it that way. So in terms of what does it mean? It means we would have a specified contribution towards the NHS for a particular thing that's compliant with legislation, but the ask comes out of the list we've already got. In terms of additionality, there is a possibility to get funding through Homes England, and Homes England at the moment are releasing grants to put affordable housing on large-scale developments that haven't secured policy compliance. They can only do that if it's not secured in the 106. So that's called additionality grant from Homes England, and it happens outside of and separate from the planning process. So whilst those discussions may be underway, whilst those discussions may be happening quite positively, it's something that happens outside of planning. So it's not something that you as committee members have any say or influence over at this stage. On the other end of the spectrum, I'm aware there's a couple of sites that actually additionality has gone in and they've become 100% affordable housing schemes. Now, we wouldn't want that for 750 dwellings because that would be a really unbalanced community. So we are looking at wording of 106s to look at additionality and making sure additionality doesn't then unbalance the housing stroke for housing balance. But it's something that happens outside of planning, that planning doesn't and can't get involved in. It's not a material consideration for members. It is a possible stream, but it's not something we can consider when making a determination on the application. The other thing that's been talked about is SIL and SIL relief. So SIL in terms of contribution is worked out on the floor area of open market properties. So if 95% of the development is open market development at the moment, there'd be a SIL charge for 95% of those dwellings. And the SIL charges then, the contribution gets given to the local authority. We give a meaningful contribution to the relevant parish council that they use towards their particular improvement projects. And then beyond that, we can use it for other community infrastructures. The discussion that you heard earlier about SIL relief was if they put in to relieve SIL, they could potentially then increase the affordable housing to 10%. But again, the SIL relief process sits outside and after we've made a decision on the planning application. So again, it's not a decision that we've got control of in planning, but it is discussions they're having in terms of how, what can they do? And they are investigating the measures that are available for them to try and enhance the affordable housing offer, even outside of the planning process after this decision. But for this decision, it's really tough. Members can only consider the information we've got at the moment. Everything else is options. There is scope, and certainly the developers here and is hearing the concerns and all the discussions in terms of encouraging those discussions to continue. But in making the planning decision on the application, you can only consider what you've got in front of you.
Thank you very much. It's frustrating because it's difficult knowing that you've got to you'd have to approve the application in order to, without the contributions, in order for other people to step in and help. So we don't know if that's going to happen in advance. That's quite a frustrating position to be in. Can I, Chair, make a suggestion or make a proposal? Based on what I've heard, I would like to refer the application and consult with the NHS to ask whether they would be able to put together information about projects that would be needed for the provision of the healthcare services for that area, so that the service directors could then reconsider the weighting of how that money is distributed that is currently available from the developer. I'm happy for other members to add to conditions or requirements for that deferment. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Bruce. Councillor Slocum.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to say thank you to the officers. I know the amount of work you've done on this, so please don't think that I'm not respecting that. I think we could sit here for another hour and if all seven of us could go around the room and we've all raising the issues. So I also wanted to defer about an hour ago, but I would like to defer to see whether it's possible. I'm going to put it in the simplest terms that I know, whether the community can get a better deal than what they got now. And I want a better deal within the money. I realise we got the money, but I think the community deserves more affordable housing, and that will mean obviously, of course, taking away from other areas. But I think we need time and then we need the resource to look at this properly. We need time to hear from the NHS. This is a bundle, so I'd like to add that to it, please. If I could second that proposal, if that's all proposed and where.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Hendry.
It's been proposed and seconded, so there's no point in the appendix, it's already gone that fast.
Okay. Councillor Phil.
I guess my position on the sector is we have to look at what's in front of us. And much though as a committee, we would love on lots of applications to try and redesign applications so that they could be better than what's in front of us. We have to assess what's in front of us and decide whether what is there is acceptable in terms of planning. And so any decision we make has to be justifiable on that basis, and that any applicant has the opportunity to, if we are deferring something for reasons that are beyond the control of the applicant, in other words, going back to lots of other people who ask about other things, that's not something the applicant can control. It's not necessarily will be seen as in the planning process of being fair to the applicant, because they have put their application in. We've talked about the pollution issues. They put an environmental assessment in by their professional officers. That's been assessed by environmental health officers or professional officers here. And for us to try and re-look at that and say that in our opinion, it might not be right. I'm not qualified as an environmental health officer. And when you start quoting all the various gases that we may or may not be assessing, I haven't got a clue what you're talking about. So I need to rely on professionals to give me that information. And that's what we've had in the report before us today. Obviously, if members go for a deferral, that's absolutely up to them. I think it does come with some risks. This has been the system for a very long time. We've heard that by not making a decision, it makes it more difficult for other sources of funding for affordable housing to be achieved. There are downsides potentially to this as well. And it just also worth reminding, when we look at the assessment in terms of the financial viability, I think I'm right in saying financial viability said there was zero affordable housing that was affordable and that was deliverable in this being viable. So there is a 5% extra that's been put in that technically the applicant didn't need to put in and wouldn't necessarily be there should an inspector look at it to see whether he thought something was reasonable or not. That sits with them. So it's just a deferral doesn't necessarily come with a one-way decision. It might come back and bite in other directions. And as Councillor Bruce said, there are other benefits relating to this reference to things like the highway going through, which is instrumental to those other two developments actually working properly, which they don't at the moment, and cause a lot of grief to an awful lot of people. One of the questions I was going to ask, which I don't think is relevant because I think they find a way to get it, but deliverability of that road, I want to know when is it happening and does it happen right at the start, because we want to get that sorted and not have that as the last thing that ever gets done, only finally gets connected. But as I say, we'll wait and see how members do something, but it's very difficult. It's slightly dangerous for a committee to try and redesign an application in front of us. It's the sort of aim to the line of horse, you end up with a camel, but we just need to be careful.
And I was just going to say, in terms of the spine road, I'll answer the question that maybe not worth answering, but it is a hybrid application. So the spine road is indeed is a full element of the planning permission. That if it were granted, it would be granted full planning permission and would be able to be started on. The longer term ambition for the site in its entirety would then be that the elements of construction would come forward, I think, in about 3 phases. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, but the spine road and the bund would go in up front to enable those phases then to come later. But the benefit of the connecting through road would happen sort of quite early on in the scheme versus the rest of the development. And it is controlled by condition 1. So there is a requirement for it to begin within 3 years.
In terms of councillor Slocum's comments about sort of assessing further affordable housing provision, if I've understood that correctly. And then in the report, there was a review mechanism mentioned. What is the timescale for that review mechanism?
It's normally triggered through the 106, but if the development is coming forward in phases, you would probably review at the end of each phase, or sort of 95% completion of each phase, to demonstrate whether that phase delivered as expected or not. But you'd get 5% provision across those phases. But then if you were developing, if you were reviewing, let's say 90% through construction of those phases, then those affordable, any additionality through affordable could either be accommodated on site in future phases, or a financial contribution taken towards provision elsewhere in Bridgwater.
So can a review mechanism be triggered without a decision? Can that be, so you have to have the decision to get a review mechanism?
The issue is the independent assessment of the viability report, which is what we've done to inform the recommendation of the members, is effectively a full-on financial review of what the development can stomach at the moment, and where we are with 5% affordable housing is where we've got to with the viability review. So where we are right now is subject to a fairly recent viability review of the development currently proposed, with all the obligations currently proposed. The purpose of the review is to check whether the anticipated costs and the anticipated values of the properties are as assessed, because you project what it will cost to build it, you project what you think you'll get back from the income once you've sold the houses. But until you've built some houses and sold some houses, you can't then review how closely aligned that would be to the assumptions of the department at the start of the review. So it is dependent on A, consent, and B, them actually building out at least 90% of the first phase, to give us some real life figures to see if there's anything we can put back into it.
So are we realistically, if the decision was to defer, really better to focus on the the health elements?
We can reiterate the request that we've put to the NHS in terms of, can you be specific in terms of a particular project that's close to this site, that is impacted by this site, that would then be reasonable for you to take contribution towards. If they can do that, then the question is, where do you lose that money from in the other obligations that are listed in 3.1? So that there isn't any additional money on top of what you've already got listed in the obligations, but the question is, what do you remove it from? So in terms of just to sort of simplify it a little bit further for members, you know, of the financial contributions that are in there, there's a financial contribution towards the Dunbar Roundabout Improvement Scheme, which is actually now completed, but it was completed on the assumption that all of these housing developments would be contributing a proportionate amount to the development costs. That hasn't happened yet because all the development hasn't had consent yet. So we're already a little bit in deficit for delivering those infrastructure improvements. The other contribution is towards a pedestrian improvement scheme, which is 389,000. So there were concerns raised by residents and the parish in terms of pedestrian connectivity, cycle connectivity. That contribution is being taken towards those connections and those benefits. And there's a travel plan and financial contribution to try and assist with the modal shift that members heard about, that again is being raised as a local concern. And that's got 673,000 being taken towards it. So the question would be, if we had a justified amount from the NHS, where does that come off of any of those obligations? But they're the other obligations we are securing because of the concerns that you've heard from local residents.
So as things stand, we have a proposed and a seconder for a deferral to consult with the NHS in order to give more time for them to come back with a proposal that complies with the test. That, Councillor Slocum, you raised the issue of the affordable housing. I'm struggling at the moment to know how we put that into a deferral mode that is workable.
I mean, if I could say, Madam Chairman, to me, that's as is important. That is a major factor to me. You know, I'd be lying if I said I could just agree to that, because those two factors are really important to me.
So therefore, the slices of the cake, and I don't think we can pick off any more at this point as to what we would want less on and want more on. But I think we need to ask officers to come back to hear what we've said and to perhaps present options at a future meeting, which gives us more affordable housing, but understanding that that will probably mean some reductions on other elements of the scheme. That's where I am at the moment with it. In terms of, Councillor Philmore.
If you're going to have that route, then it would be useful to give officers some sort of timescale to work
Yeah.
with, because it might be that if they go to the NHS and say, oh, we can come back to you in 18 months, is that good enough? I mean, we need to have a time frame to operating.
What do you think is a reasonable time?
Sorry.
Sorry, this is a technical, probably a silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is there, I mean, we know the amount of contribution in total that the developer can provide that's on the screen in front of us. It's currently split up in this way. Is there no way that we can say we accept that total amount, that the application can be approved in that way, and then the council can go away and talk to the NHS and decide how it's going to be split up between Transport and Dunball and NHS, whatever? Because from what I've heard, the amount for Dunball roundabout has been spent already. It's not like this is needed to deliver the Dunball roundabout. It's already been spent. So within our reserves and everything, we've not got the capacity to say, this is the amount, we're agreeing the total amount, leave it to us how we divide it up between the different services. Is that possible?
I think the question is transparency. So the recommendation is actually to defer the decision to officers because of the 14-day consultation. So actually, what we were asking for members today was a resolution to generally support the officer recommendation in terms of the outcome, but ultimately we are still within a 14-day consultation. So you're not able to make a full decision today because we still have to wait for the outcome of the 14-day consultation. If members were understanding that the viability is what the viability is, the split of the financial ask is how we've currently divided it. If the response is, we understand that to the extent of the viability ask, but actually we would divide it slightly differently, and we would want either more affordable housing and an NHS contribution if it can be justified, or an increase in affordable housing, seeing a reduction of the other costs. The question is just transparency, because members, and if you were making the decision, you'd be making the decision based on the heads of terms and the obligations being clear and publicly available for everyone. So this is what the heads of terms were. If members are broadly happy in terms of this is the cake, but we're not happy with how we've sliced it, and the answer is we want the slicing to be more affordable housing, which will mean there will be a hit on some of the other financial asks, we were asking you to delegate the decision generally to officers anyway. If you were happy to delegate the decision to officers to continue those discussions to get to the best outcome we can get to affordable housing, then we can redivide those obligations in the understanding that the financial viability is what the financial viability is. So we can't get more. We can look at what the impact of reducing some of the other asks might be to accommodate for the difference, while in consultation with the NHS to see if they can justify their ask. And the recommendation was in discussion with the chair and vice chair. So there's no vice chair today. So it would be in liaison with the chair in terms of this is where we ended up in terms of the head of terms. It reflects the viability as independently scrutinised. It's just we've changed the divisions of the obligations to reduce some of the other financial asks to increase what we can as much as we can. And this is where we get to. If members are generally happy with that, we could leave it with the chair. And if the chair felt that that needs to come back to committee, she can obviously call it back in and it can be subject to debate in the round again. If she's satisfied we've got as far as where we can get, then, you know, it could then remain delegated to officers.
As proposers and seconder, can I ask the proposer first, Councillor Bruce, if that is satisfactory? It's you.
I think if it's okay, can I ask councillor Slocum to say first, because I think the affordable housing was, do you mind?
Put me in the hot seat, I don't mind. I do understand why you're saying that, and I quite understand that's the most sensible way. Not being a very sensible person, as you know, I personally feel rather than give the responsibility to the chair and vice chair and yourselves, I would much prefer it to come back to the committee. Tell us what's on the table. 2 hours ago, I said I didn't like the cake, and I still don't like the cake. So I think for transparency, I think it would be better to come back to a formal special meeting. Then we're all clear, and we're doing everything above board, not behind, because we'll be accused of doing things behind the scenes, and I don't want to do that. I know what I want. We're both on adults and health, and we know the most primary thing is obviously health and housing are the two key things. So for us, it's really very pertinent, and I think that I'd like it up front, please. But that not meaning that you would be doing anything wrong. I didn't mean that.
Really appreciate that. Now, I have to say, I would prefer for transparency for it to come back to committee. But as officers, if we go ahead on that basis, as said, I think I'm ready to take a vote. Okay, so all those,
But I was just going to confirm what the recommendation is that members are voting on, just so everyone's absolutely
you read through what
clear.
he's,
Yeah, so
what he said?
effectively, the deferral is for a reconsideration as to how the obligations have been set up and divided, to look at the priorities in delivering affordable housing in consultation with the NHS, to see if they can provide us with a demonstration of something that links to the scheme. If they can, then it's rebalancing the obligations to increase where we can provision of affordable housing and the potential for an NHS contribution, and for it to be represented to members in its rebalance whenever we are ready to do that. But I'd assume that would be at least 3 months.
Well, it's good to have that time scale. Thank you. So that is the proposal that's been seconded before us. All those in favour, please show. That's against. Well, and then no deferral and sorry, abstentions. There aren't any on. Okay, thank you. And thank members for the debate, and I thank the audience for bearing with us. That is the end of this application. It's just appeals for us now, isn't it? You're welcome to stay, but you're also, I will understand if you escape. So thank you.
So, appeals won't take very long at all because we haven't actually got any decisions. So it's just to let members know we've got an appeal submitted, which is a written rep, application, which was a change of use, under a prior approval, which is a form of permitted development, change of use in an agricultural building to 7 dwellings, and associated building operations. So it's refused by officers and it's a written reps appeal. So it's been submitted, no decision yet. So maybe at the next meeting, but that's it. Things are appealed.
I wish to thank officers for the information that they provided through the meeting. It's we are really fortunate to have you with us this afternoon, so thank you. And thank you members for the debate, and I declare the meeting closed. You'll be